let's bring in the thoughts of one Conservative MP, that is Michael Fabricant, the Conservative MP for Lichfield, who joins me outside Parliament. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what are your first impressions of Sue Gray's report?
Well, we'd all been anticipating this for quite a long time, actually, and when I got to see it, and particularly the conclusions, I didn't think it was as damning as I expected it to be. If I could show one photo, I don't know whether you can zoom up on it. And what it is it's the Prime Minister looking at a presentation that's about to be made on policy. And I think he's got orange juice and food around. I mean, would you call that a gathering? I suppose it was a gathering, but in no way is it a party. Look, there's no question that the Prime Minister is damaged by this. There are a lot of angry people out there, particularly in my own constituency. People who couldn't attend weddings, more worryingly, people who couldn't attend funerals. My very best friend, his mother died in hospital during COVID, from COVID, and he couldn't visit her when she was...
Are you angry, though, when you hear of people breaking swings, partying till 4:30 a.m., spilling red wine, abusing the cleaners?
Hugely angry, hugely angry. I mean, there's sort of arrogance there, but you were right in your introduction to say the Prime Minister wasn't there. I mean, it's a very, very big building. I mean, people think it's a sort of semi-detached little house. It's not. In fact, the Prime Minister said today it's over 5,300 square metres, several hundred people work there. The Friday night parties that we heard about, which was news to me, were when Boris Johnson was some 50 miles away at Chequers. So
he did turn up at some of these events. So clearly, Sue Gray talked about how his presence and the presence of other senior members of staff give the impression to junior members of staff that this was all acceptable. Boris Johnson didn't walk into those rooms and say, get out of here, you're breaking the rules, this is not allowed, you should be working or you should go home. In fact, he joined in and had a drink.
Yes, I mean, the example given was the works party or the works drinks for a going away party for Lee Kane, the previous press secretary. But Boris Johnson had been given advice by very senior civil servants that actually it was part of the day's job. Anyone who's worked in business in a senior role will know that one attends going away parties and that sort of thing. So I think that very loud motorbike over there, we're not being heckled by a flatulent socialist. But Boris Johnson himself had been advised that, and, you know, I think that's the key thing.
Which might give the impression that he wasn't...
The Prime Minister never drafts laws. You know, at the end of the day, and I think it's worth casting your mind back, to begin with, people like Michael Gove were saying, in my opinion, quite rightly, look, we don't need to have rules. We've just got to use our common sense. Don't mix with outsiders because you can spread the disease.
Well,
and then the press said...
The government messaging at that time was not even just to break them, don't bend the rules. They were suggesting people's lives were at risk if they did.
But it wasn't in this instance because these were all people who had been working closely together anyway. So it was a perfectly reasonable understanding that they were exempt.
I'm not entirely sure the person of wallpapering the Downing Street flat who went to that birthday party was working closely. Let's in the end though look at what Sue Gray. Sue Gray said that the officials and political leadership in Downing Street need to bear responsibility. Now, Allegra Stratton's resigned, Martin Reynolds has gone, the former Director of Communications has gone. Civil servants have borne the responsibility. Can you name anyone politically who's borne responsibility?
I don't think that is the question, if you don't mind my saying, Darren. You've posed the question, but I think really that's not the question. I think the question is how could this ever have happened in the first place, and what could be done in the future to ever stop it happening again, if God forbid we have another pandemic, and God forbid we made the mistake, actually, of listening to what newspapers said and saying we want clear directions, because this is where all the problems came from. People drafting, because earlier you were saying, you know, Boris didn't understand his own rules, but they weren't his rules in the sense that he was saying, you know, you mustn't mix, you mustn't go outside to parties. And, you know, this didn't happen. Boris didn't do this. It was all in the workplace environment. So, you know, we've got to move on. And I know politicians always say that, but a lot of people out there, and I think GB News listeners in particular, may well say, you know, come on, there's a war in Ukraine and all the rest of it. And the point is that Boris has put in place a new structure at number 10 Downing Street to stop this from ever happening again.
Why do you think so many of your colleagues weren't on the benches today to listen to the Prime Minister? It's not exactly a show of support if you leave halfway through, is it?
Well, I think people were getting bored with it, to be frank. They were there at the very beginning. They
heard... because they're a bit embarrassed by it all?
No, I know your implication, that it's a good question. But I don't think it's that. I think look, the thing about Boris is that he's a Marmite character. And that's a good example. I personally am a great Marmite fan, and I'm a great Boris fan, and I still support him totally, because having been in business, having known what it's like to run a large organisation, and don't forget, he doesn't run it, it's the senior civil servants who run it, I can understand how this whole thing arises. It's all empathy. Just as I can also understand the huge anger of people in Lichfield and Burntwood and elsewhere who feel, you know, we stuck to the rules and Boris didn't, even though he thought he was sticking to the rules at the time.
Just very finally, what do you make of Tobias Ellwood's question? Could you name another Prime Minister who would have allowed the shenanigans inside number 10 to carry on like Boris Johnson did?
Well, I'm not...
We know Theresa May would never have allowed it.
No, Theresa May wouldn't, but I could name Prime Ministers, but I won't. I mean, I can tell you that when they stopped selling beer and wine, which of course we have in the House of Commons, and some would say we should stop that. And that was back in the 90s, a long time ago. You know, the business about bringing wine in on a suitcase started under Blair's administration, happened under Brown, and for all Theresa May knew, it might have happened under her, but she certainly wouldn't have condoned it and didn't know about it.
Indeed. OK, Michael Fabricant, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us here outside Parliament. I'm going to shove you over that way if that's all right.
Shoving away.
Good. Thank you, Michael.